Carl Jung's most disturbing discovery was not the shadow itself, but the nature of its ownership. The radical truth that the light we project onto others is the very darkness we refuse to integrate into ourselves. For the empath, this is not a philosophical problem, it is a neurological and spiritual crisis. You believe your gift is the boundless capacity to feel the suffering of the world. You mistake your profound empathy for a sign of moral superiority. You are wrong. What you call a gift, Jung identified as a psychological vulnerability, a profound form of inflation driven by what I call the God complex of affliction. You are haunted by a silent, corrosive anxiety. You move through your life carrying the emotional burdens of strangers, friends, and family like misplaced luggage. You feel drained, perpetually exhausted, and fundamentally misunderstood. Why? Because you are not simply observing suffering, you are unconsciously using it as the raw material for your own sense of self-worth. You don't just want to help, you have a deep, unshakable need to be needed. Without a pain to soothe, an issue to solve, or a soul to rescue, you feel utterly vacant. Jung understood that the most compelling human urges are often driven not by virtue, but by the unconscious, shadow-filled desire for power and control. Your need to be the empathetic anchor for everyone else is a subtle, magnificent act of psychological self-deception. It is a way of outsourcing your inner void. Modern neuroscience offers a chilling echo to this Jungian insight. When you witness distress, your mirror neurons, those sophisticated neurological circuits that allow you to simulate another's experience, fire intensely. But for the true empath, for the one suffering from the God complex of affliction, this process doesn't stop at mere simulation. It spirals into a destructive pattern. The stress hormone cortisol floods your system. You are physiologically experiencing the pain. But what you consciously interpret as noble, selfless compassion is, on the deep neurological level, a defense mechanism. By focusing entirely on the distress of the other, you successfully redirect the searing, critical spotlight away from your own chaotic, unintegrated shadow. This is what I define as the shadow mirror effect. Jung's entire practice was a relentless search for the paradox embedded within the symptom. He saw clearly that the quality a person most prides themselves on, their generosity, their logic, their sensitivity, is the very point at which their shadow is most likely to strike. Take the empath. You pride yourself on your depth of feeling, your capacity for connection. But this capacity is precisely where the shadow of the empath takes root. The shadow in this context is the part of you that is selfish, cold, manipulative, and desperate for validation. Since the conscious mind rejects these ugly truths, the shadow finds a brilliant disguise. It manifests as an overwhelming need to serve. When you rush in to solve a friend's crisis, the conscious thought is, "I am helping." The shadow's whisper is, "If I solve this, they will be indebted to me. My identity as the good one will be reinforced. I will for a moment feel whole." This is the psychological inflation Jung warned about, mistaking a psychological defense for a spiritual vocation. You are not rescuing them. You are attempting to rescue yourself by proxy. You are falling victim to the burden of unacknowledged agency. Jung documented a case in 1918, a woman he referred to as Maria, a quintessential empath of her time. Maria arrived in his office suffering from inexplicable bouts of nervous exhaustion and intense resentment toward her family, for whom she had sacrificed everything. She was the family's emotional center, the sole confidant, the crisis manager. Yet she felt perpetually unappreciated. She could not understand her own anger. Jung observed that Maria's compassion was not truly free. It was conditional. It was a transaction. She gave love, comfort, and solutions, but she expected her recipients to play their part, to remain dependent enough to need her and grateful enough to validate her sacrifice. When they achieved self-sufficiency, or worse, when they failed to recognize the magnitude of her silent suffering, her shadow, which contained her enormous, unlived desire for a life of her own and her suppressed fury, would erupt in an unconscious act of self-sabotage, often manifesting as physical illness. Her body was screaming the resentment her conscious mind refused to admit. Maria's great psychological breakthrough, and the key to yours, came when she realized that her need to fix others was simply the projection of her own deep-seated, painful conviction that she was broken and needed fixing. Her entire life was an elaborate, externalized repair operation designed to avoid looking at the blueprint of her own incomplete architecture. This brings us to the classification of the empath's shadow. You may identify yourself through the three core manifestations of the projection paradox. The first manifestation is the magnetism of the minor key. This is the unconscious habit of seeking out wounded people, not out of altruism, but because their complexity and brokenness provide a stimulating, challenging project. Healthy, happy, well-integrated people offer no such opportunity for the empath's shadow to operate. They cannot feed the God complex of affliction. You subconsciously select partners, friends, and even employers whose lives are a perpetual, dramatic crisis, because the drama provides the fuel for your heroic identity. Your shadow requires conflict to survive. The second manifestation is the debt collector persona. You have an unconscious, invisible ledger. You keep track of every sacrifice, every moment of emotional labor, every time you prioritize their needs over your own. You will never ask for repayment overtly. That would contradict the conscious persona of the selfless saint. But your shadow will enforce the debt by making the person feel perpetual, unspoken guilt. You may employ passive-aggressive tactics, silent suffering, or sudden dramatic withdrawals of affection to make them feel the weight of what they owe. The third and most insidious manifestation is emotional inflation by proxy. This is the habit of experiencing your own suppressed emotion, your own rage, grief, or terror, only through the safe, distant vessel of another person's crisis. Instead of facing the terrifying magnitude of your own unmourned losses, you hyper-focus on your friend's divorce. Instead of confronting your personal cowardice, you become furious about your colleague's moral failure. This is classic Jungian projection, the refusal to feel your own darkness, resulting in the exaggerated moralistic condemnation of the same darkness in another. Your inner life is so overwhelming, so terrifying, that you have to experience it as a second-hand emotion. The dark side of ignoring these manifestations is not just burnout, which is a modern, sanitized term for spiritual collapse. It is the complete, final loss of the true self in the process of attempting to become the persona of the Savior. You become a hollow echo, a perfect mirror reflecting everyone else's light and dark, but containing none of your own essence. Jung's path of individuation offers the only true escape from this prison of virtue. It requires an act of radical psychological violence against your most cherished self-image. It requires you to consciously starve the God complex of affliction. You must stop doing and start being. This process of integration is not about becoming cold. It is about becoming sovereign. It is about dissolving the merger, separating your pain from theirs, and transforming your empathy from a destructive bond into a clear, analytical lens. This is where we must blend the ancient wisdom with the neural reality. When you are caught in the emotional maelstrom of another, You are in a state of neuro-empathic entanglement. Your prefrontal cortex, the seat of rational judgment and executive function, is temporarily deactivated by the rush of limbic system emotion, the fear and stress you have internalized. The first step of integration is the conscious re-engagement of the prefrontal cortex. This is not meditation in the traditional sense. It is a clinical intervention of the self. I call this technique the Cortisol Boundary Protocol. When you feel the wave of another's pain threaten to engulf you, you do not try to suppress the emotion. Suppression is futile. Instead, you activate the 3 steps of the protocol. First, the naming. You name the exact emotion you are feeling. This is not my anger, it is her shame, and I am feeling an echo of my own suppressed frustration. Naming it shifts the experience from a raw sensation back to a cognitive process, immediately dampening the amygdala's fear response. Second, the location. You physically locate the echo in your body. The weight in my chest is not grief, it is the anxiety of being needed. It resides in my sternum. By localizing it, you contain it. You define its boundaries, and in doing so, you reclaim the psychological space it has occupied. Third, the sovereignty statement. You conclude the exercise with a radical act of self-assertion. I see your pain, it is real, but it is not my wound to bear. I will offer aid, but I refuse the merger. This is the psychological equivalent of neural rewiring. You are interrupting the destructive pattern of neuro-empathic entanglement and establishing what I term selective empathic immunity. You are not sacrificing your compassion. You are elevating it from a chaotic emotional reflex to a powerful, conscious choice. You are evolving your consciousness. The empath's true evolutionary task is to stop being a mirror and start being a beacon. A mirror merely reflects what is already there. A beacon projects a light that guides from a position of independent strength. Your previous role was the sacrificial host, a term Jung would have readily accepted for the victim of a powerful archetype. Your new role is the integrated observer. You must accept that your shadow, that part of you that craves control and validation, is not evil. It is merely unevolved. It is a necessary counterweight, a pressure release valve for a consciousness that has expanded too quickly. Individuation, the process of becoming whole, demands that you acknowledge this shadow's need for selfish power and redirect its energy. You must accept that your shadow, that part of you that craves control and validation, is not evil, it is merely unevolved. It is a necessary counterweight, a pressure release valve for a consciousness that has expanded too quickly. Individuation, the process of becoming whole, demands that you acknowledge this shadow's need for selfish power and redirect its energy. Jung never asked anyone to abandon their fundamental quality. On the contrary, he required them to deepen that quality by stripping away its unconscious motivations. For the empath, this means you do not stop feeling, you stop merging. Let us return to Maria. Her integration did not begin by ceasing to help her family. It began with the reallocation of emotional debt. She had to realize that her resentment was not about their ingratitude. It was about her own failure to live her own life. When she began to establish small, rational boundaries, refusing a request, taking an afternoon for her own creative work, she felt terrible guilt. That guilt was the evidence. It was the resistance of the God complex of affliction as it was starved of power. It was screaming in fear of meaninglessness. Maria ultimately learned to use her shadow as a guardrail, not a ruler. She transformed her manipulative urge into sharp, analytical insight. Instead of rushing into rescue, she began asking difficult questions. Whose problem is this? Will solving it serve their growth or mine? This is the development of the diagnostic eye, the ability to see through the presented surface of distress to the underlying psychological dynamic. When you implement the Cortisol Boundary Protocol, you are not just protecting yourself. You are performing a profoundly humanitarian act toward the other person. By refusing to be the savior, you force them to confront their own lost agency. You refuse to lend them your strength, thereby compelling them to find their own. This is genuine empathy, far deeper than superficial comfort. Now we must explore the 3 subtle signs of shadow integration, 3 signals that you have moved beyond the need to be needed and are transitioning into a state of self-sovereignty. Sign 1. The neuroequanimity shift. This is a physiological change. When a loved one is experiencing a crisis, your immediate physical reaction is no longer a flood of cortisol and a gut-wrenching contraction. Instead, you feel a cold, almost clinical focus. You can perceive the pain, but it is like a bell ringing in another corridor, not an explosion in your own room. Modern neuroscience would describe this as a recalibration of the connections between the amygdala, limbic system, and the prefrontal cortex, allowing you to access the rational thinking area even in the face of high emotional stimulus. You have moved from a mode of sympathy to a mode of controlled resonance. Sign 2. The passive listening mandate. The empath shadow always wants to do. It wants to offer solutions, give advice, and seize the narrative so you can be the heroic problem solver. The sign of integration is the ability to sit in a difficult emotional space without doing anything at all. When someone is venting, the urge to begin speaking does not arise. You are simply a still presence, a space for them to sort out their own chaos. You realize that your most powerful gift is silence. You have recognized that your need to be needed often interrupts the other person's process of self-discovery. Sign 3. The purifying boredom. This is the most surprising sign. In the past, a life without drama, without someone to rescue, would lead to a tremendous sense of emptiness and restlessness. This is because your God complex of affliction was starving. When you integrate the shadow, you find peace in the stillness. Moments of uneventful, unstimulating quiet are no longer an invitation to seek or create crisis. They become moments of deep contentment, free from the need for external validation. You begin to enjoy the company of yourself, the inner parts that were once overshadowed by the loud demands of others. Boredom is no longer a threat, but proof of psychological autonomy. Jung spent his life proving that all psychological development is a religious process. It is the individual's search for meaning and wholeness, the process he termed individuation. For you, the empath, individuation is not about finding your strength, but about finding your weakness and owning it completely. Your true power lies not in your capacity to endure the suffering of others, but in your ability to put down that suffering without feeling less worthy. You are equipped with an advanced brain, a nervous system wired to feel the world deeply and complexly. But a gift unchecked becomes a burden. Your goal is not to be a saint. Your goal is to be whole. Accepting your shadow, accepting the part that craves drama, the part that secretly wants to be worshipped for your sacrifice, is not a step backward. It is the only step forward. Because only when you stop seeking your worth in the pain of others can your compassion become pure, untethered, and genuinely powerful. You have been awakened. The burden you carry is not a curse, it is evidence of your potential. Your difficult task now is to separate the truth from the illusion, the light from the abuse of light. Stop fixing the world outside and begin building the structure of your own self. See you in the next dimension.